Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast where we'll be exploring the Onapsis Security Platform for Oracle eBusiness Suite. Before we get started, I'd like to address a couple of housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and will be available for download on onapsis.com within 24 hours. If you have any questions during the demo, please feel free to ask those in the Q&A window at the bottom right hand of your screen. All questions will be addressed at the conclusion of the webcast. And now I'd like to get things started and introduce our speaker. Today's session will be presented by Onapsis Director of Product Management, Paul Stamp. I'll now turn things over to Paul to take you through today's presentation and demo.
Thank you, Shannon. So, as I said, I'm Paul Stamp. Probably the first time many of you are hearing from me. I've been here for about 4 months, but I've been in the security industry for too long, basically. So, today we're going to talk about ERP systems. ERP systems and business-critical applications often hold the crown jewels of the company. They support the most sensitive business processes. They contain often very sensitive information about how the business operates, who customers are, what products are, pricing, all this really very sensitive information. And if one of these systems were to go down, it has a tremendous impact, or tremendously negative impact on the way that the organization might work. However, we've found that ERP security is a bit of a black hole. As I say, I've been in security for about 20 years. And before I came to Onapsis, I knew very few people that knew anything about ERP security. Because there's a lot of myths that have grown up around ERP security, around people saying that, hey, we've got our segregation of duties and our GRC tools in place, we're applying patches, we're migrating to the cloud, so we're all safe, or people can't access it through the internet. So people think they're safe. But we had a study performed recently with the Ponemon Institute and found that a very large number of people believe that an Oracle EBS breach would be serious or catastrophic. About 70% really doubted the integrity or the ability of their EBS systems to be able to withstand the breach. They reckon that the cost of taking EBS offline would be $5 million in some cases. Yet very few were confident that they could actually detect a breach for it to happen. And one thing that we found is that just the level of knowledge that people have around ERP security is very low indeed. A lot of security people that come from policy backgrounds, they come from network backgrounds, they come from server and infrastructure backgrounds. You get the few odd, kind of database and application person, but there's very few people that really know anything about ERP. And Gartner's picked up that this is becoming a bigger deal too. The hype cycle that Gartner creates, they have one on application security, and they've identified business-critical applications as an emerging market on that hype cycle. So they're really recognizing that the downtime of core business-critical applications could really be awful for an organization. As you would expect, Gartner works extensively with Onapsis to put this together, and we share many of the same views around what we think an organization should be doing in order to protect themselves in this space. And also, we're starting to see a lot more vulnerabilities in the Oracle Business Suite. I'll talk a little bit more about Onapsis Research Labs in a second, but we've got people that are constantly looking at the EBS platform and looking at ways that it might be exploited. They've discovered and reported many of them, and many vulnerabilities, and one that was reported earlier this year actually would allow somebody without a valid user account to exfiltrate sensitive data from that system without authenticating. And if they did that right, they could even do that over the internet. So what Onapsis did is that we worked with Oracle, and we released a detailed threat report alongside Oracle, We explained the critical nature of the vulnerability. We reached out to customers to help them determine whether they're susceptible or not, and we provided a set of recommended mitigation steps. Now, this vulnerability was fixed by Oracle in their critical patch update in July 2017. So if you haven't applied that patch, then I would recommend that you do so post-haste. But when we think about where business-critical application security has come from, a lot of the traditional measures that people have put in place around identity management and user provisioning, and then looking at segregation of duties and GRC, these things are necessary, but they're really not sufficient. So where we've been focusing right now is actually looking at the platform that it sits upon. Is it configured correctly? Are the patches installed? How do the interfaces look? And then being able to continuously monitor, see what users are doing with that system, see if we can see indicators of threats, see if we can see indicators of policy violation, and really understanding what is the threat posture or compliance posture of a business critical application at any given time. Now, where are we going with this? What we're trying to do is try and move this to making the real-time detection of cyber attacks, starting to look at virtual patching, starting to look at research and threat intelligence, looking to integrate with the overall customer ecosystem. ERP security is just one of a number of areas of security that your average security person has to deal with. So us being able to interact with the different tools that you've got in place, your SIMs, your configuration management systems, your GRCs, your task management systems, all these are essential to really fitting business critical application security into an overall security program. But we're also looking not just at the vanilla platform itself, we're also looking at the custom code itself that sits on there, doing static analysis on that, looking for things that people are doing with the system, that they may be, how they may be introducing vulnerabilities in the way that they customize the system. But if you think about it, really, it all boils down to ROI. Attackers don't have unlimited resources. They're going to spend their time on the places where it has the most effect. And because these business-critical applications house and manage such sensitive business processes and data, then that's where they're going to concentrate. So it's really a good idea for folks like yourselves that are responsible for managing the risk of your organizations to think like the attacker, think of the ROI, and identify how crucial and vulnerable an ERP system is likely to be. Onapsis ourselves, we've been around for about 8 or 9 years now, and our mission is to keep business-critical applications secure and compliant. We really were the first movers. Really in the Fortune 2000 and federal organizations, we've got over 200 customers. Many of them are in SAP. We're thought leaders. We've research labs that have discovered over 500 vulnerabilities, both on SAP and on Oracle together, looking at attack vectors and constantly coming up with thought leadership on how these systems might be compromised. We've got patented technology covering our algorithms and capabilities that look for these vulnerabilities and look for the way that people might be exploiting them. But we've got that backed by some great people, executives from real blue chip companies like IBM, RSA, EMC, Sophos, Amazon. We've got fantastic investors, people that I'm sure many of you who've dealt with other security partners would be familiar with. And we've also got some real luminaries on our board of directors and advisors, really to help us to understand what are the needs of folks like you, and how do we need to make our product and make our offering as good a fit with your needs as possible. And things are going well, so we're in our 4th consecutive year of 100+% year-on-year growth. So things are going well here. So let's talk a little bit about the product that we're bringing to market here to help you to do that. We have the Onapsis Security Platform for Oracle EBS, and I'll give you a demo of this in just a few moments. But what we're able to do is really start to create and transform your EBS security platform And getting your security, IT, and audit teams together, which can be devilishly difficult, especially in the space of business-critical applications that have often lived in their own silo. Because they are quite specialized quite often, and because they're so deeply aligned with the business rather than being general purpose IT. So getting all these things together is really what we're trying to do here, and whether that be looking for application level security risks, checking for patches, checking for parameters and configurations, looking at the way that your users are provisioned and the authorizations that they have. But this then allows you, when the auditor comes along, to be able to streamline the way that you're able to actually achieve compliance and demonstrate it to them. And then when you find things that you don't like, be able to prioritize those based upon the business impact, so you can put a mitigation strategy in place that is really aligned with what is our business risk at any given time. And again, we can work on-prem or in the cloud, so we can fit with whatever IT model that you're using right now. Our research labs, mentioned those guys a couple of minutes ago with the vulnerability that we came up with earlier this year. That's just one of over 500 that they've identified, both on the SAP and the Oracle side, including 100+ vulnerabilities that have affected SAP HANA. So if any of you guys are running both EBS and SAP, then you have you're able to combine the value to be able to address both of those. We've worked hand in hand with many government authorities around the vulnerabilities that we find. For example, the first ever warning that came out from US CERT, we worked very closely with the Department of Homeland Security for the first ever US CERT that was pertaining to SAP business applications. And we were regularly invited to speak at conferences around the world. You'll see us at Black Hat, RSA, DEF CON, all of those good things. And really, our flagship product, the research labs, really are the engine behind, or the people behind the engine, should I say, that really feed the Onapsis Security Platform. That there's one thing to be able to look for these things, but knowing what to look for is a critical gap in many security teams' skill sets, and Oracle. So the Onapsis Research Labs are really helping to bridge that gap, especially in the SAP and the Oracle space. So how about switch gears a little bit now and show you, how this thing works. So what we really have is that kind of a main dashboard, and what the product is doing is it's going out there and it's scanning and it's looking for misconfigurations, it's looking for vulnerabilities in your system. So it's going out and performing those regular scans. And we take those scan results, and we can populate a dashboard that tells you where those highest level threats are. And also, we can tell you how they map to particular compliance standards, such as Sarbanes. But what we have is we're able to align those with those different corporate standards to be able to tell you, what are the vulnerabilities that we're finding, and what is the impact on those vulnerabilities upon your compliance posture. Finding a vulnerability is one thing, and definitely if it's a critical vulnerability, you need to go out and patch that thing. But if it's something that is the speed or the priority with which you attend to something like that really depends on how quickly you can get to it. You're very seldom able to patch everything right when you find it. But if there's an impact on the compliance posture of the organization, then that's something that you often need to deal with much more swiftly, because sometimes there might be penalties involved. It might involve you getting in bad graces with a partner. It may involve you not being able to do business with a partner. So being able to prioritize those is a big part of what we do. We also are constantly monitoring these latest critical alarms that are down here. We're constantly monitoring. You can define rules for what are the things that you need to look for, whether they be threats of somebody attacking the system, or whether they be somebody acting in a way that would be non-compliant with policies, the way that they're abusing privileges, or there are just certain parameters that you want to watch, and you want to make sure that if you see certain activities happening, you want to know about them. On the EBS side, there's a particular scan that we can run. We can go in there and we perform the scan on this system. As you can see on this particular system here, we've identified a number of vulnerabilities. Some of them are more critical than others, and it helps you to prioritize which are the ones that you really need to go in and fix. One of the top ones that we've seen on this particular one is we've got is an example is that you can look at right down to the detail of what the vulnerabilities are. This particular vulnerability is for a system that's got a missing critical patch update, but if you look down the left-hand side here, you'll see that there's a number of things that we're looking for. Things like SSL not being configured, things like default passwords in use, cross-site scripting potential vulnerabilities. We do look for some separation of duties, particularly when it comes to kind of IT level users. You've got somebody there that's able to both create a user and assign a responsibility, and when you put those two things together, that gives that particular individual an inordinate amount of power and could potentially lead to fraudulent activity within the system. So we're able to look for all of these different types of things, and we'll tell you, okay, what is the risk, what have we seen, where have we seen this, and then we're able to give you much more detail about exactly what you need to do to go and fix that. Actually, you'll see here that you've got one particular finding, which is a critical patch update not applied, but it actually corresponds then to 269 different vulnerabilities. So we're able to group these all together and help you to prioritize, okay, what are the things that I need to do on my system in order to make sure that I'm in compliance with regulations and I'm managing risk effectively. What underlies the platform? Well, we have a set of virtual appliances. We have a console, which was what I was just looking at then, and we have a set of sensors, which are virtual appliances that are deployed near to your systems. For EBS, we don't require anything on your EBS system. There is a user that we require to be created, a read-only user that can go in there and start to just look at some of the configurations to make sure that things are working properly. Any of the communication, we connect to your underlying database on your EBS side. We execute database queries to understand that configuration data. And all of the communication is encrypted. All communication is initiated by the sensor. It's mutually authenticated to make sure that that the communication is where you believe it is coming from and minimizes the likelihood of spoofing. So we're putting these things in place. It's low impact on your system. It's built with security in mind. So really, it's a low impact way of getting the information that you need. If I talk a little bit about a service offering that we're rolling out, and that's a lot of our customers, what they have is they have the system deployed, and they have it deployed on an ongoing basis, and they manage a program of regular vulnerability assessment, a bit like you might with other types of vulnerability assessment tools that you have in place, to look for OS level or application level threats. We also have a service offering where, just on a short-term engagement basis, we can come out, we can understand your EBS environment, we can discover those critical vulnerabilities, we can sit down with your team, we can validate what we find, we can prioritize what we find with your team, and then present your findings to your executive management. And that helps you to understand, okay, where is my risk? And also, it helps you to be able to potentially, articulate that risk to execs within your organization to help you, make a case for added investment that you may need. So that's something that we do. That's an engagement. Lasts kind of in the 2 to 3 week time frame. There is a cost associated with that. However, if there's something more about that, then we can. We also have a no-cost assessment that we call the business risk illustration. It's a zero-cost. It's a very basic scan of your EBS system. It takes a couple of hours. It's low impact. There are no credentials that are required on your system. It looks for the most common vulnerabilities, and then we'll provide you a report of the findings to your executive management. So it's much more of a low-end assessment, but it helps you to understand where are the basic vulnerabilities within my environment. If we were to compare the business risk illustration and the vulnerability assessment, both of these are going to check for common vulnerabilities. However, the vulnerability assessment takes it a lot further. It does a much more in-depth analysis across multiple systems. It looks for, hey, what can an authenticated user do within this system? We'll sit down with your team and we'll validate our findings and we'll help you to prioritize activities, and then we'll present this to your executives. The leave behind report for the vulnerability assessment is much more detailed than the business risk illustration. As I said, the vulnerability assessment takes about 2 to 3 weeks. Whereas the business risk illustration just takes a few hours and is no cost. So that's really the difference between the two. And if you need to learn more about that, then we'll be contacting you we'll be following up in the next couple of days, and you're very welcome to talk to somebody a little bit further if that's something you'd be interested in. So, in conclusion, I think we all know that ERP security is often overlooked, despite the fact that it is the system that holds the most sensitive information in the organization. Business critical application security is getting increased scrutiny from auditors. It's getting increased scrutiny from the attacker community, and even somebody like Gartner has decided that this is something that is that people need to pay attention to. The Onapsis Security Platform, it assesses and monitors security and compliance risk, for EBS systems. And but we do have as well a vulnerability assessment or a business risk illustration available to help you get started. So thank you very much for listening to me for the past 25 minutes or so. And at this stage, I'll hand it over to Shannon, who I think there's a couple of questions came in.
Yes. So we have a question from David. Who would be responsible for this tool or my overall security as it relates to EBS?
Right. So it does vary. In about, I would say, 2/3 of the types of organizations that we deal with, it is the security team that manages this. And a lot of that is because they've identified their EBS or the ERP systems as a place that they don't have the visibility that they require, and no security team likes to have a part of their organization into which they don't have visibility. So in about a good 2/3 of organizations, it's owned by that team. And then the other third is probably about, some of them it's the compliance team that needs that, where they've had an audit finding and they've been the impetus behind going out and saying, look, these are the types of things that we have to show our auditors that we are looking for. And how do we validate that we are looking for those, and how do we track progress towards fixing all the things that we've found? OSP helps to really automate that process for them. So that's another place where it's found. And then the third is really the business owners themselves. Because they are the business owners of the system, and in some organizations they're held highly accountable for the security of their organization, and they're the ones, and it's quite often the actual administrators of the ERP system that are responsible for the OSP platform.
Great, thank you. We have another question that came in from Greg related to some of the attacks. So how would an attacker get to the system if it is not accessible to the internet?
Okay, there's a key tenet of security is that that compromise is inevitable. They will get in somehow, some way, somehow. whether it be through a phishing email or whether it be, through a misconfiguration, or whether it be, some type of malware that somebody opens. Getting that initial footprint into an organization is really not hard. If you go out, you don't even have to have you don't have to search particularly far. You can actually go and buy network time in many of the largest companies in the world, just by going onto some of these sites, and the people have compromised systems on those sites and will actually sell you time on those hosts in order to go and do what you need to do. So quite often they'll get that initial footprint, but once they've got that initial footprint, quite often these systems are available to many people within that organization. In fact, to almost everybody. Once they have that type of access, then they can start to do a lot more with that. So just by saying, hey, this system is not accessible from the internet, it's really not a good way of saying that we're protected. Plus, in a large organization, you have tens of thousands of people working for you. I'm pretty sure you don't know every single one of those, and I'm pretty sure that there will be at least somebody within your organization that does not always work above board. So there's really a combination of attackers that get into your system plus people you've employed. Both of these things are things that you need to protect against.
Great, thank you. And our last question is from Amy, and as it relates to the cloud. You mentioned having a cloud deployment as well. What are some of the things I should be thinking about if I'm thinking of migrating, EBS to the cloud?
Okay, this is a massive question. I was at Open World recently, and there's a lot of people are thinking about this. EBS, there's a lot of people that are using just normal infrastructure as a service offerings like AWS. Oracle Cloud itself, the Oracle has an infrastructure as a service as well, specifically built for EBS, and it has a lot of automation tools in there as well. But any time that you lose control over a system or perceive to lose control over a system, as often people think that they do when they move from their own data centers into a public data center, it's vital that you maintain visibility into what's happening on those systems. And that's really where we come in, giving you that visibility so that you can understand and you can see, as you say, there's an extended set of people that now have access to my systems. What are they doing on those systems? Are we able to maintain the same processes and integrity of those systems as we migrate them from a much more controlled environment that we have right now into an environment that we don't necessarily have the same level of control over? So it's really that visibility that you need in order to do that, and that's what OSP helps you to provide.
Great. Well, thank you, Paul. That's it for our questions today. Thank you, everyone, for joining. As I mentioned, this webcast was recorded and will be available for download on onapsis.com within 24 hours. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach directly out to us. But otherwise, we will see you on the next webcast. Thank you very much.